In this video, we're going to identify the bones of a skull. We know that bones of a skull are divided into two groups, cranial and facial. So we're going to start with the cranial bones first. Now remember, cranial bones are called cranial because they come in direct contact with the brain. And the very first bone that we're going to identify here is the frontal bone. So the frontal bone is the bone that forms most of our forehead and then part of the roof of the skull. And then it also forms the superior parts of our orbital cavities. Okay? The frontal bone posteriorly is going to form a suture. Okay, so this is a suture. And the suture is formed between frontal bone and two parietal bones on the sides. So parietal bones are the primary bones that are going to form the roof of the cranial cavity, right? So we have a parietal bone on one side, and then we have a parietal bone on the other. Okay, in the rear of the skull, the parietal bones are going to articulate with the occipital bone. So the occipital bone is a bone at the rear of the skull, and I am going to turn the skull over so we can see it a little bit better. The occipital bone cannot be misidentified with any other bone because it has this very big opening called the foramen magnum, all right? And that's where the spinal cord enters the cranial cavity. So the bone at the rear of the skull, right here, the one that has that big opening, is called the occipital bone. I'm gonna move the skull to the lateral side, and on the lateral side we are going to have the temporal bone. So the temporal bone, we see a part over here, and then I am going to open the roof of the skull here, and we'll also see it internally. So temporal bone is one of the bones that has lots of bone markings. It's one of the most complicated bones, so lots and lots of structures there. So we're still on the cranial bone, so let me open this so we can see some bones on the inside. Here is part of the ethmoid bone, and the ethmoid bone here, that's what we see here, is called crista galli, and the olfactory foramina. So we have a plate with lots and lots of openings, and through these openings, our olfactory nerve actually reaches the brain. So we have one ethmoid bone, and because it still touches the brain, it's considered a cranial bone. And the last one is the sphenoid. So sphenoid kind of looks like a butterfly. So we're gonna see it here. Here is the body of a sphenoid right in the center. It has some little wings here, and then it has some bigger wings on the side. So most of the sphenoid bone is only seen on the inside, although if we look on the outside of the skull, we may see parts of the larger wings right here on the lateral side of the skull. So far we named all the cranial bones. So sphenoid bone, which we see here. By the way, we see the foramen magnum of the occipital bone on the inside of the skull as well. We named the frontal bone. We talked about the parietal bones on the sides that form the roof. And then we talked about the temporal bone, which is on the lateral side and creates some important landmarks for the bones of a skull. If we look at the facial bones, so facial bones are called facial because they do not come in contact with the brain. They create the structures of our face. And they tend to be smaller, right? So we're going to start naming them from the most superior one, then we're gonna go inferiorly to make it a little bit easier to remember. So right here at the base of the nose, those are two nasal bones, so one on each side. Okay. Then if we look on at the medial angle of the orbital cavity, there is a little bone where tears kind of collect, and that bone is called the lacrimal bone. It's a pretty small bone, so you have to look very carefully here to see the distinction between the lacrimal bone and parts of the maxillary bone, which is the next facial bone. Okay, so we have nasal, maxillary bone, lacrimal bone, all of these are paired. Zygomatic bone right here that forms our cheeks, that's also paired, so we're going to see it on both sides, just like the maxillary, the nasal, and the lacrimal. Okay. Then we're going to have a mandible. So in the facial bones, the mandible is the only movable bone, and that creates our temporomandibular joint, allowing us to open and close the mouth. The other bones, so I'm going to move the skull so we can look at the inferior side. So this is the roof of the mouth. At the most posterior side of the roof of the mouth, we have two little palatine bones. So again, a paired bone, and they're considered facial bones. The other bones will be seen in the nasal cavity. So on the midline, we have a triangularly shaped bone. That one is called vomer. It's a single bone, just like the mandible. And then on the lateral sides of the nasal cavity, we see these two inferior projections. They're called inferior nasal conchae, and they are paired bones. Okay, so let's review them one more time. Nasal bones at the base of the nose, lacrimal bones where tears are coming out of the medial corner of our eye, maxillary bone or upper jaw, which serves as support for our teeth, zygomatic bones, which form our cheekbones, mandible, which is the only movable facial bone. We looked at the roof of the mouth. At the most posterior side, we have these two palatine bones, one on each side. And then in the nasal cavity, we've identified the vomer, which is on the midline, and the inferior nasal conchae, which is on the lateral sides.